Yes, let's see, just a little bit about me. I'm the statewide interoperability coordinator for Arkansas. So I do a lot of work with Homeland Security and CISA to ensure that we have good, reliable public safety communications here. And I'm also the program director for our statewide radio system. And I also have the ESF2 responsibilities for the state of Arkansas. So, I change hats all day long, every day, depending on what's going on. Give you guys a little bit of background. I'm sure you're aware there's a solar eclipse that will be here about 13 months. It will occur on April 8th, 2024. The expected duration from the beginning of the eclipse in Arkansas to the end of the eclipse is 2 hours, 38 minutes, and 2 seconds. The duration of the totality is about 2.5 minutes, and it will occur at about 12:30 in the afternoon. In Arkansas, it will move from southwest to northeast and has a path across the state that takes up pretty much the whole of the state. So this gives you an idea of the path across North America. The moon shadow will move across the border into Texas, from Texas up through Oklahoma. Then it will pass through Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois, Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And then it will cross into Canada. So you can imagine there are going to be a lot of people that are going to want to see this. A lot of people, scientists are going to want to study it. There's going to be a lot of people that it's just cool and they want to see what's going on. And they will travel to that area of totality to see that total eclipse. For Arkansas, you can see the orange swath is the path that it's going to take through Arkansas. And then over there on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see just a little bit of the times when it's going to pass through some of the major cities. And just as point of reference, I live right in the middle of the state in Conway. So I'm thinking of renting out my front yard for campers that week. When we started talking about the eclipse last year, we decided that it would be a good idea, a couple of things. One of the first things we did was reach out to CISA and Homeland Security and ask them to support us with some planning assistance. In the state of Arkansas, we don't have major league football teams or baseball teams or anything like that. So we just don't have many really huge events where lots of people are coming into the state, in a very concentrated amount of time. So I felt like we needed some extra help with that planning. And as I looked at that map, I realized that our neighbors in in Texas and Oklahoma were also going to be affected. So we kind of invited them to the party. So it's the 3 states that are working together to develop those communications plans. Well, after that, then we started looking at lessons learned from the solar eclipse in 2017. The primary source we got was we were able to get with some folks from Wyoming, and they shed a little light on some of the things that happened with them. And this just gives you kind of the highlights of what they saw. The event in 2017 brought 1 million visitors to Wyoming. They had problems with crowds, long lines, and traffic. People ran out of gas. There was problems with bathroom facilities. There was problem with food. And of course, emergency services were impacted. Also, and again, for those of us that are in the communications world, we're not surprised when we see that the cellular system is overloaded, because what we learned even here in Arkansas in 2017, and it was only a partial eclipse here, the minute that eclipse started, everybody whipped out their cell phone and started taking video of the eclipse or live streaming it on Facebook or whatever. So the commercial cellular network got overloaded pretty quickly. The other thing that we learned from our folks in Wyoming was that there would be special events organized around the eclipse. and I called two out here. One of them was the Caesar event. It was cooperation through education, science, and astronomy research. So those, those are the scientists. But then there were people having all kinds of festivals around the eclipse, where there were music festivals and events leading up to and then after the event. From an emergency management point of view, that puts an extra spin on what you kind of have to be ready for. So specifically, to dive into that a little bit more, this down in the bottom right corner, you'll see the path of the 2017 eclipse. When they were trying to plan for that eclipse, and as we have been trying to learn their lessons, one of the things that came out was that the local citizens were doubtful that there would actually be any extra visitors to their state during this event, especially people that lived in the rural areas. They just couldn't imagine that a visitor would want to come and be in their area to watch this eclipse. Well, what we've learned is that, of course, people want to go to the rural areas, because during an eclipse, even a solar eclipse, middle of the day, as soon as it gets dark, all the street lights are going to come on, all the automatic lighting is going to come on. So people want to be in the rural areas because they want to see that total darkness. And because the local citizens were so skeptical, it caused problems for the local leadership to really even do any planning, get people to be cooperative when it came to, how they were going to handle all these visitors into their area. Small communities faced logistical nightmares of the number of tourists that were in their area. The tourists get there, and some of the tourists are very well prepared. They know exactly what they're doing. But some of them come in thinking that they're going to go through the local, Wendy's or McDonald's or whatever and grab them something to eat. And they're not prepared for the line that goes, down the street and around the block. So that waiting in line and those long lines to get any kind of food or bathroom facilities became a problem. One of the things that has been pointed out several times to us is there will be people come from all over the globe for this. So from an emergency management perspective, we have to be ready with a way to be able to translate or have translation services available, because, just because you're from France or Italy or wherever, you can get here and get hurt and need emergency services. So we need to have translation services available for those visitors. And then also there's just the wear and tear on traffic and local services that has to be taken into consideration when you have that many tourists come into your area. Some of the things that we learned about assets, and when I talk about assets, I'm talking about both human assets and tangible equipment assets. They learned to just anticipate that all personnel from all public safety agencies will have to be on duty during that time. I mentioned about local citizens earlier. Apparently, in the year or so leading up to the 2017 eclipse, there were some areas that had staff turnovers during the planning process. So there was kind of a loss in momentum when that was going on, and that hindered them. Obviously, radio, cell, and satellite communications were relied on heavily. Internet services, and this is something to think about for planning, especially internet will be burdened. And so certainly EOCs and PSAPs and operation centers that rely on that, they're going to need to be aware that this could be a problem. Frequency management and communications coordination is essential. And that piece right there is one of the big places that we're working right now. And then I kind of highlighted this at the bottom. Amateur radio support is in critical locations. They found that was one of the things that kind of became a lifeline, that to have their amateur radio operators available that could help pass information. So 2024 Eclipse planning activities, just again to kind of bring you up to speed to where we're at. we have that large events, technical assistance that Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas are participating in. We did a scoping session last summer for that, and then we've held 2 briefing sessions via Zoom calls just like this. And then last week we had an in-person planning session with personnel from Homeland Security. During the session last week, we did a deep dive into some of the lessons learned. And we just talked through a lot of what people are concerned about, and then really talked through, okay, really, what do you need to be planning for, and how do you get started? From the state level, we will be surveying our first responder community to find out what tools they expect to be using, where their shortfalls are. We're going to try to follow the PACE planning method. So we're going to ask them to name their primary method of communication, their alternate method, their contingency, and then their emergency method. We will probably, we've not quite nailed it down yet, but we will probably have some regional meetings along that path of totality with, you know, face-to-face meetings with those communications experts in those areas, just to talk through everything and make sure that kind of all their bases are covered. And I'll just disclose to you all, just like in Wyoming, we have people here in Arkansas that think that we're not going to get that many visitors. But, you know, our state has 3 million residents, and they're saying that we can expect to have 3 million visitors come to the state during this time. So this will double the size of our state for that period of time around the eclipse. At the end of all this planning, ideally, what we're going to have is we will have quick reference cards, job sheets that we can provide to people that are working these communications activities in different counties. Homeland Security will be helping us with deconflicting between requests for assets. We have limited deployable assets in the state, and I'm already getting requests for them. So we will rely on DHS to help us deconflict and identify the best places to put those limited resources. And then, if possible, and we can request resources from FEMA or from outside agencies, then we'll certainly do that. We also will have an instant action plan that will, of course, contain the comms plan when this is all over with. Our approach, we work with Homeland Security, as I've said, on a lot of this stuff, but at the state level, we have our communications unit working group. And just so that you all know, JM is the chair for that working group, and he keeps us in line with that. The communications unit working group is made up of ComLs and ComTs and OxCom personnel. And in general, their kind of regular work is to help us with the statewide radio system and help us make sure that we're using that those resources efficiently. But for this, they've been tasked to help with the planning for this event. We're putting together, I'll be providing them coverage maps for the statewide system. They've mentioned identifying fox hunters to look for intentional interference. They will be looking for operators that are willing to travel into that path of totality to assist counties where maybe there aren't any operators. They are working to integrate hams into the emergency management structure. So if that's something you're interested in, you'll want to be focusing on ICS classes. And then they will be working to push out the OxCom training to as many people as possible. They have an OxCom class coming up in about a month, I believe. And then we are working towards defining the roles and responsibility for everyone that wants to help. Now, I have talked a lot about this. At the end of the day, we anticipate that every county will have some sort of a shortfall. So we are encouraging them to get with their amateur radio community and bring some of those operators into the fold, if you will, and help them get comfortable with the operations in the county, integrate them with with the planning and with the communications. We anticipate, at least we're hopeful, that different counties and different cities will have, for example, first aid stations, or maybe water stations. And of course, there'll be different events in all the cities and counties. So, you know, your local law enforcement and your local firefighters, your local volunteer firefighters are not going to be able to cover every one of those events. So I can certainly see operators from the amateur radio community being on hand to, you know, give traffic updates, to pass messages from the guy that's trying to direct traffic down at the, you know, the one ingress and egress route from the city, back to, you know, the incident command. I can see amateur radio folk being on hand at those first aid stations or at those water stations, just to kind of have situational awareness. And again, full disclosure, I am very concerned at once the eclipse is over, everybody's going to want to go home. So everybody's going to try to get on the highway at the same time. Now, if everybody behaves themselves and moves on, then that'll be fine. But we all know somebody's going to do something and there's going to be a car wreck. And then you're going to have traffic backed up, and you're going to have first responders that are going to be hampered from getting to that accident to, you know, help work that accident. So, especially in Arkansas, and I'm sure, you know, some of your states are the same. Once you get off the main thoroughfares, the interstates, onto some of the rural 2-lane highways, traffic is going to become an issue quickly. So even having amateur radio folk that can be stationed along those 2-lane highways to provide just some awareness of what the traffic is like could certainly be something that would be a big help. We're not the only state having the eclipse, right? There are lots of states having the eclipse. So if you are in one of those states and you feel like this is something you want to do and you want to help out, I would say reach out to your local emergency personnel. Tell them what you can do. Tell them what your ideas are, things that you could offer. If you've not done the incident command structure training, do those ICS classes. And then if you're able to, and if you're where you can get to an OxCom class, I would certainly encourage you to do that. What else we got? Okay, that was a little bit quick, y'all, but I'd be happy to answer questions if you've got any.
Okay, I'm taking the spotlight off of you. So whoever's talking has got the screen. We got hands up all over the place. Looks like Dan's got his hand up. Go ahead, Dan. Penny, you want to stop your screen now? Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, hi, Penny. That was a great overview of the planning process. And if I remember correctly, in 2017, Wyoming's population had twice as many people as the population of the state show up for the total eclipse. And there was a moderate amount of concern when they realized that was happening. And fortunately, there were no major incidents within the incident as they had planned for it. So hopefully all that's being taken into account. And if you have access to federal resources, they'll be able to give you the demographics within the same travel time to help refine what to expect if you can predict it.
Right.
And tell you what, chapter and verse, if you want to get involved in any kind of emergency communications, start with the 4 core independent study classes and go from there via OxCom training. There's no arguments. You'll find no arguments in this group about that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And Yeah, I appreciate your words about getting the training. It's not because we want to tell everybody what to do, but we found just, I mean, you guys know, the more everybody is trained in the same methods, then the easier it is to work an event. That's what it comes down to. I had a question. Steve asked, what division of DHS is advising you and working with you mostly? Right now it is CISA, so Homeland Security, the CISA division, Homeland Security Region 6. Advisor Travis Williams out of Louisiana, if any of you all happen to know him. He was the statewide coordinator for Louisiana for a few years, and in that role, two of the big things he had to do was coordinate communications for the Super Bowl. And then he also he coordinated communications for the field hospital that they stood up in New Orleans to address COVID. So it's not his first rodeo, and he's all over it, and he's paying attention to what we're doing. So we're grateful to have his help. We are being advised, and this goes back to kind of what we've learned from Wyoming, is to expect about a 2-week period of activity. Our Parks and Tourism group are out heavily promoting this, but one of their tactics is to try to get people to plan events in the several days leading up to the eclipse, and then even in the several days after the eclipse. That way you kind of don't have that glut of people trying to travel in all at one time. So yeah, an operational period of about 2 weeks, a week on either side of the eclipse is what we're being advised on. Because you guys know all emergencies begin locally, right? And
Right.
So whatever happens, that mayor of that little city or that county judge is going to be the one that's going to have to deal with that. So that's the message we're trying to get across to them now, is to plan for that extra long operational period. And it's not just the daylight hours. It's going to be all night, all day, all night, 24-hour operational period for 2 weeks. So you've got to have a lot of people to help cover all that. And then just as you said, Victor, where are you going to put those folks up? How are you going to feed them? How are you going to get them moving around? Because they're, if they have to move from one location to another, that highway is going to be backed up. So how are you going to move them around? So we've been talking about, light utility trucks or golf carts, to move people short distances and get them moved around.
Good presentation. That you kind of got the reverse of a Florida hurricane. You've got everybody evacuating into Arkansas and North Texas. What unique problems, or how are you guys handling what I call the 50-mile border region, where you've got a lot of cross communications and stuff that may or may not be the norm?
Well, one of the things, hopefully the way we're going to work some of that out is that we do have Arkansas and Oklahoma and Texas all working together, and we're hoping that Homeland Security can help us work our way through some of those issues. We have not gotten anybody from Tennessee yet in the planning effort. We do have the contacts over there, and we recently had a law enforcement event that we had to do some cross-state coordination with Tennessee. So we've got those contacts. We're just not there yet on what exactly we're going to do. The public safety system in Tennessee and the one in Arkansas are pretty much just alike. So we have shared frequency and radio programming back and forth so that first responders can communicate. Texas and Oklahoma will be a little bit different. We've got a gateway set up where we have some communications over into Oklahoma kind of all the time, mostly for weather events, but we will probably put some of that into service for the eclipse.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I might make a comment here at this point. In Idaho, in the civic team, when we had HARS up here, they activated the hands to be the eyes and ears. We have a lot of rural areas, I'm sure you do. And a lot of these smaller counties and smaller areas just don't have the police force to cover something that big. They don't have the manpower. So the amateur radio operators became the eyes and ears. in one county, Boise County, a pretty large county, they had a major repeater of theirs, a police officer's repeater, which happened to be on the same mountain as our repeater, but it went dead. It died on all that. And the hams became the only communications they had for a while. And that worked out a lot better than I thought it would. It went really smooth. They kept things going. You're right. There were people everywhere, lawns, side of mountains. It looked like herding cattle. But it went off fairly smoothly considering everything. We did have one town that looked the whole thing over. They saw an opportunity, and they're a small town. It had to be Horseshoe Bend, if anybody knows where that's at. It was sitting there in one of the main arteries of the roads that go back and forth. And so they knew they was going to have a road jam. So they got their fire department out there running around there with their boots to make collections. Well, needless to say, that slowed things up even more. And it was the hams that noticed this, says, hey, this is a small problem. And so they got one of their police officers to make a call and get that taken care of. But, this is surprises. But by and large, it went pretty smooth. But that came from being prepared.
That's good to hear. There's a question over here. Paul says, every visitor has to eat, go potty, and sleep. How's this paid for? Well, I'm just going to say our local governments are trying to figure that out right now because, federal government doesn't designate funds for this. I guess they don't see this as an emergency. So they don't really designate funds for it. I did hear anecdotally of a state, and I'm not sure if it was Wyoming or if it was one of the other states in 2017, that several of their local jurisdictions passed ordinances that if you were going to have somebody come camp on your farm, for example, they had to have a permit. The farmer had to have a permit to have all those people camping on their farm. And they had to, as part and parcel of that permit, they had to disclose how they were going to deal with the human waste, how they were going to deal with all the trash, how they were going to deal with the routes in and out to their farm and the traffic. So that would be an avenue to recover some costs for the county or the local government. I have not heard of anybody doing that in Arkansas at this time. $30 admission to the county. That's not a bad idea. You said, Victor, you're asking about classifications of hospitals, trauma system, basic life support. Again, you're in Washington, so you're probably already going to know the answer to my question. The question, and that is that I think we have only 2 trauma centers. What is it, level 4? I'm not sure how they characterize those, but I believe we have only 2 of them in the state of Arkansas, and the rest of them are tiered down from that. But honestly, we've got several counties in our state that there's not a hospital, that if there is a local medical clinic of some type, we're lucky. So that is a whole other layer of complexity here, is that if somebody gets hurt in one of the counties where there's not a hospital, how are you going to transport that poor person to a hospital if you've got traffic everywhere? So Dan says, have you noticed that after repeated engagements with other agencies, this planning effort, that the cultural differences impacting working relationships are easier to overcome? Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I've worked with the statewide coordinators in Texas and Oklahoma for years at this point on different efforts. And I have no doubt in my mind that I pick up the phone and I call Nikki or Carla and say, hey, this is what I need. They're going to be right there for me. And same thing for us. So the more you know the person's face and the more you've had a cup of coffee with them or a glass of tea, then it makes that planning effort a little bit easier. Have you looked at some type of Air National Guard med evac units being deployed for training to support whether from Arkansas or other states? I'm going to tell you, I'm working primarily on the communications side, but I do know that our Army National Guard has gotten spun up for this planning just in the last 2 weeks. So I'm not sure what all they're talking about, but I feel certain that yes, they will be there supporting us, and from soup to nuts, whether it's additional law enforcement or traffic control, up to evacuating folks that need some medical attention. And y'all, I'm just going to throw this out there. We're talking about things that could happen during the eclipse, but there will be regular people leading their lives while all this is going on around them. Grandma's still going to be at home, and what happens if she has a heart attack and you have to get her to the hospital? Eclipse or not, those kinds of, somebody said the other day, babies are still going to be born whether there's an eclipse or not. So, that's something else we're trying to take into consideration, is you've got to have staff to cover the eclipse activities, but then you still got to have staff to take care of everything else that goes on a daily basis and will continue to go on. So it's big. It's big. Paul, we have a burn center. It is connected to our children's hospital, actually, but they have a very good burn center there. And that had not even crossed my mind, but absolutely, that could be a concern. There was one other thing I was going to bring up. Shoot. Oh, well, if it comes back to me, I'll tell y'all about it.
Well, we sure appreciate you doing this for us.
Oh, I'm happy to be here, and I'm glad I could work it out. And I hated that JM had an issue with his family, but like I said, he's kept me out of the ditch plenty of times. I'm glad to step in and do for him and you guys. It's been a good discussion.
For those that don't know JM, JM is one of the hands as part of the RATPAC team, and he's very involved with disaster communications in Arkansas and other areas. He's a well-known ham in a lot of places. Victor, you got your hand up.
Thank you. I'm looking again at traffic control, and overnight locations for operators. The idea of, you're talking again about rural roads. Are there very many places where you can pull out, or is it just the white line and the farmer's field for 95% of the mileage, and no place really to pull out and pull off? What's your road situation like for handling temporary stoppage?
I would say more on the side of not having a place to pull over, especially in the path of totality, because that's where a lot of our more rugged terrain is in the state. We have more, I hate to call them mountains because they're certainly not what you might see in other parts of the country, but it's pretty mountainous. And so those highways get pretty narrow and not much shoulder on the road at all.
As you can well imagine, in Idaho, we have a lot of those kind of roads. And again, the whole thing, we had it was amazing how many people were everywhere. The Forest Service is concerned about fires and such, and that didn't happen, but there was certainly every opportunity, because there was the campgrounds filled up in no time, and it was overflow, and it was on the side of the mountains, and you name it, and you couldn't, you move them away from one place, they just go someplace else. There was no answer.
Yeah.
And
We probably the closest thing we've had to something like this is, for a few years we had a music festival in Northwest Arkansas that was a fairly large site, and it was all primitive camping, and it was very much party atmosphere. And yeah, you would get one situation taken care of and getting one area cleaned up, and then those folks would just pop up somewhere else. And yeah, it was, they don't do that anymore. It was kind of a crazy event. Oh, I know what I was going to tell y'all earlier. This eclipse will be, as I said, in April of 2024. Well, in Arkansas, starting in March, going through to probably May or June, we have a very strong likelihood of having tornadoes. And if not tornadoes, it's bad weather. It's storms and hail, and especially in the February, March timeframe, flooding rains. So that's a whole other layer of contingency planning here. You know, what do you do if you've got a bunch of folks that are out primitive camping on Farmer Bob's pasture and a tornado comes through? You know, not only how are you going to get services to those people, but how are you just going to warn them that this is happening? This is, you know, and here's where you need to go shelter. You know, they may get something on their phone that says that they're under a tornado warning, but how are you going to get them out of there to a shelter for safety? So just so many things to think about and try to plan for. Steve, I think you asked who we were in touch with in Tennessee. I've been working with their SWIC a little bit, and then is it Pete?
Peter Rogers.
Yeah, he was engaged, I think, with this event that we had. It's been a few weeks ago.
He just stepped down as SWIC.
Yes. But yeah, I'm grateful to our amateur community here in Arkansas because, wow, storm spotting, they are all over it. And every one of them I know are good folks and very trustworthy, and I'm happy to know them and happy to have them on my team. So,
You mentioned eyes and ears. Skywarn is very good at training amateurs to be reliable eyes and ears.
Yes, absolutely.
In Arkansas, did last June when you had the Region 4 and Region 6 exercise, Arkansas did an excellent job with their GIS output for that exercise. That was spread all over the place. That was just wonderful.
Yeah.
Steve, was that Arkansas that did its own post-processing on the WinLink data in that exercise?
Both Arkansas and South Carolina Emergency Management Division. Arkansas did it for Arkansas, and South Carolina did it for the FEMA regions. But that providing that situational awareness is becoming increasingly important, especially when the internet goes away.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to provide additional information about the ground truth all over the place is becoming a recognized. It's under the it's under the looking glass, and people like Penny and Greg Hauser and the other SWICs are moving this thing forward, and everybody gains.
Yeah.
With this, I think I'm going to wrap this up. I thank you again, Penny, and we'll get your slides out there. I saw there was a link to them. Usually we have the person like yourself send it to me, but if they're out there, I'll pull them down and we'll get all of that tied in and get it done tonight, hopefully.